I've come from a town called Droitwich, which is just south of Birmingham.
Didn't know where I was going, but yeah. We found it in the end, we were on time.
Fantastic, love the show. Absolutely brilliant, yeah. Essential watching on the Friday night.
Even when there's races that aren't on, you're getting a little bit of Formula One every week.
Well, Hamilton fan through and through.
Jackie Stewart.
I like Schumacher.
Jensen Button.
Jim Clark.
Damon Hill.
Ayrton Senna, definitely.
There is a star that lights the road. I'll take this ride and just drive. I wanna be the only one to make it to the light. I'll take it to the edge of ride. And maybe I could be the one riding to the setting sun tonight. And just drive.
Hello and welcome to the F1 show, where we're rounding off a very special week, analysing, reflecting and ultimately celebrating the life of Ayrton Senna.
Well, that fateful weekend in Imola 20 years ago left an indelible mark on Formula One, and joining us to discuss it are Roland Ratzenberger's teammate David Brabham, celebrated sports writer Richard Williams and three-time Grand Prix winner Johnny Herbert. Welcome, guys.
Now first, some very sad news. Nigel Stepney, a man who engineered Ayrton Senna at Lotus and helped to guide Michael Schumacher to 5 Formula One World Championships with Ferrari, has died. Nigel was the racing team manager and technical director of JRM and was killed in a car accident earlier today. Very difficult to digest that sort of news so soon. But David, you worked with him. What will be your enduring memories?
Well, he was a dedicated worker, there's no doubt, and I was saddened when I heard the news today. And I immediately thought of his family, because he adored his family, particularly his little girl. So my thoughts are with them.
And Richard, you knew him when he started at Ferrari. What are your memories of him?
I did in the early 90s when he went there, and I talked to him quite a lot, and it was very striking. He discovered fairly quickly that when you're the chief mechanic at Ferrari, it's like being the #1 driver at any other team. You don't have to buy a drink in any bar, you don't have to pay for your dinner in any restaurant all the way through Italy. And he was having a wonderful time.
And Johnny, of course, you worked with him at Benetton and Lotus.
Yeah, very hard man. He was, I think when he was at Ferrari, Michael Schumacher, it was the way that he put the team, the pressure he put on the team to really get the best out of them. And he would never give an inch at all. He would jump on them straight away to make sure they did the job, which is why they were so successful.
OK, thanks, gentlemen. Well, our thoughts are very much with his friends and family at this incredibly difficult time. OK, well, coming up on tonight's show, we're with Bruno at Donington as he takes to the track in one of his uncle's cars.
And I was at Imola yesterday as fans and drivers celebrated the lives lost 20 years ago.
Murray Walker tells us who of the current drivers he thinks is the most like the great man Ayrton.
And of course, Crofty is at the touchscreen. Crofty, what have you got for us tonight?
Gonna have to indulge me this evening. I want to have a look at not one but 2 Ayrton Senna laps from Donington, the European Grand Prix in 1993, that magnificent first lap. And we're going to look at a pole lap from Monaco as well with the great Ayrton Senna. And on Twitter, I'd like your thoughts too. If I say Senna, what's the first thing that comes into your head? What's your recollection, your memories? How did Ayrton Senna inspire you as a Formula One fan? Send us a tweet now, #SkyF1, and let's talk about the man who ignited so many emotions in Formula One.
Ayrton Senna, the new world champion.
You can see his exultation.
Wheel-to-wheel stuff. Look at this, they're almost touching.
Ayrton Senna wins at Monaco.
Well, all week on Sky Sports F1, we've been looking back on the careers of Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger. Understandably, the focal point of much of the tributes has been Imola, and on Wednesday, Rachel went there for the start of 4 days of commemorations.
20 years ago, 2 Formula One drivers lost their lives at the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix here at Imola. Austrian Roland Ratzenberger was killed during qualifying. And the following day, three-time world champion Ayrton Senna also lost his life. His Williams car veered off the racing line and he crashed into the wall at Tamburello. It was Formula One's blackest weekend. Tributes began on Wednesday night, when Roland's parents attended a mass at the circuit on the anniversary of their son's death. The next day, the 1st of May, thousands turned up at the circuit, including Ivan Capelli, who raced against Ayrton for 9 seasons.
I think that this is showing how Ayrton was loved by all the supporters of the Formula One. I saw him in 1978, the first time that I met him in go-kart. And since then, I realized immediately that Ayrton was different in driving, different physically. You could see that he has something more than the others.
Keith Sutton was Senna's personal photographer and friend to both Roland and Ayrton. He recalled the events of that weekend.
I was a close friend of Roland's, and it took him 10 years to get to Formula One. With Ayrton, it took him 3. But Roland never gave up, and it was his dream to become a Formula One driver. And then, of course, he went out, and that was, he had this accident, and I was obviously pretty distraught after that, really. That hit me really hard because, like a lot of people who were there that weekend, no one had actually died at a Grand Prix track, I think since 1982. And the next day, I was, just wanted to go as far as away where there was a quiet picture at Ravazza, where there wasn't many photographers, and I just wanted to get the race out of the way. So it wasn't till later that I found out what happened when I came back from the podium. And then there was a charter plane going back that night with all the Formula One people on it, and we were waiting for that in the restaurant, a lot of us, when the waiter came over and told us the news, the sad news. So it was hard.
A service was held at the site of Senna's accident, attended by the thousands of fans, as well as current drivers Fernando Alonso, Jules Bianchi and Kimi Räikkönen.
Well, obviously I remember when it happened, but it's 20 years ago and was a very sad weekend for F1 on that time, but obviously that's in the past, and now we remember that.
It's difficult to compare, obviously, because I didn't drive before, but for sure, as you see, even if we have a big crashes, sometimes we don't have any more injuries as before, so we never know what will happen in the future, but for sure it's a lot more safer now, and it's because of them. So we need to thank them for this, and that's why as well I'm here today.
At 2:17 p.m, the recorded time of Ayrton's death, a minute's silence was observed. Afterwards, other drivers who'd made the journey to Imola told us why they had come.
Well, I'm sure Ayrton always had a big feeling for respecting other race drivers, remembering other race drivers, and so I think he would be very proud if he would see what's going on today.
Around 50,000 people are expected to attend the circuit over the next few days. This museum is just one of the many tributes dedicated to the men who lost their lives that weekend.
Well, Rach, it looked like an incredible occasion. So many people there, the sun was shining, a bit like a pilgrimage almost.
It was. It felt like that, but it also felt like a big celebration. Everyone wanted to talk about their memories of Ayrton. And then, as you saw in the film, there were tiny children and men in their 70s. It just went through the entire spectrum, and also the children seemed to know about him. So the families were telling the children about this great driver, and then they were coming wearing their T-shirts and their hats. It was actually a really good atmosphere for a memorial. Everyone wanted to celebrate rather than...
I'm sure you're not surprised by the outpouring of support and emotion. Tell us about the first time you met Ayrton Senna. Did you know instantly that he was special?
Yeah, well, karting is obviously where we all started, and it was karting that I met him in Italy, in Jesolo, for an international event there. And you could always see there was something special, but you could always see there was something different about how he drove. There was always his style, but most people in karting, you choke the carburettor at the end of the straight just to sort of give it a little bit of oil. But he used to choke it on the exit of the corner. No one else did that, and it was his way of trying to get an advantage. But he always used to think about it and process it, so that was always stood out.
Your career's overlapped, David, for 4 years or so. What was he like? How did you find him?
I think we all wanted to be a bit like him, to be honest with you. He was incredible. His presence at the racetrack and the way he spoke, the way he drove, his commitment was something I'd never seen before. And I actually got his autograph when I was young, and it was at the Australian Grand Prix. And I went up there and I asked him, and someone said who I was Jack Brabham's son, and he looked at me and said, "I've heard about you." And I felt like $1 million, I must admit, you know, and I went away with my autograph book, yeah.
You often talk about sportsmen having this presence that you speak of, David, this real aura, and I'm sure you get asked this all the time, Richard, but where do you think he ranks amongst the sporting greats, not just in F1, but sport globally?
Oh, very, very high, as one of those figures like Muhammad Ali or Tiger Woods, who transcend their sport, who interest people who have no intrinsic interest in the sport itself at all. Something about the character communicates itself to a very, very wide audience.
That's the mark of a true great, then, if they
Indeed,
can transcend their sport.
That wide audience, actually, the people who are at the memorial were from all over the world. It wasn't just Brazilians, it wasn't just local Italians, it was people from all over the world who made the journey. So the thoughts of you guys, thank you for the moment, but Crofty, what has everyone else been saying?
And continue to make the journey as well, Rachel. I remember when I went to Imola for the first time in 2006, I spent a couple of hours just going down to Tamburello and to the statue of Ayrton Senna. And it's a pilgrimage you just have to make as a Formula One fan. It is the most beautiful place, but forever tinged with sadness, of course. And I'm sure there's lots of you out there would love to make that journey. Thankfully, lots of you out there are giving us your recollections, your memories of Ayrton Senna this evening. Thank you to Jimbo2728, who says Ayrton Senna was effectively my superhero as a kid. He made the impossible seem possible and was the reason me and my pals loved Formula One. Mark Stevo says Senna was a genius, a hero and an inspiration to my generation, missed but of course never forgotten. And FC Chowdhury 95, Senna's personal appeal remains unmatched by any sportsman. His commitment to the sport and his people were just pure passion. I don't even think we can disagree with that at all, can we, Peter?
No, we can't disagree with that at all. I think he was someone who was dedicated to his sport and dedicated to his fans as well.
And that's why we loved him.
Thanks, Crofty. Adrian Newey, the man who masterminded 4 consecutive titles with Red Bull, worked with Ayrton during his time at Williams, and Crofty spoke to him earlier today.
Just the most amazing racing driver, first and foremost. All those years when I was at Leighton House and then particularly at Williams whilst Ayrton was still at McLaren, he was always almost public enemy #1 because he was always the guy that you had to beat. That striking yellow helmet in the McLaren is an image which we'll always remember. When he first turned up at the factory and I was properly introduced to him for the first time as opposed to just saying hello as he walked past in the paddock. Then his first question is, can I come and see the wind tunnel model? And so the building at Williams, it was a separate building, so he walked across and straight away he was down on his hands and knees asking me to explain details on what we were doing differently, what would be the new features of the new car and so forth. And that, I think that desire to understand everything around him and how it worked, so that hopefully he could take that knowledge and translate it and be able to help us in developing the car was something that was really almost unique.
Is that his greatest legacy to the sport? The inspiration that he provided so that others would not only rise to what Ayrton was capable of, but maybe to better it one day?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, you've only got to look at Lewis with his yellow helmet. I know Fernando is hugely motivated by what Ayrton achieved, Sebastian the same. So I think for all of those guys, for all the top guys, then he was an inspiration.
Now, Richard, the FW16 was certainly very different to the 2 Williams cars that preceded it. Is it fair to say that perhaps it couldn't almost keep up with the pressure that Ayrton was putting on it? He was pushing it so hard all the time.
Well, the reason he wanted to join Williams at the beginning of that season was that they'd had the best car for the seasons before that, and he thought, well, this is the team to join. But there had been a change in the regulations, as there is every few years, and they had to do without some of the driver aids that the cars had had. And Williams had a bit of a problem coming to terms with that. So the car, when he got into the new car, it wasn't what he'd been hoping. for, and they were having a lot of trouble getting it right. Now, what's interesting is that after the accident at Imola, within a very few weeks, that car was winning races with Damon Hill. Adrian Newey, who we just saw, had been working very hard on improving it, on getting it to evolve, and they got there. So if he'd survived, he would have been winning a lot of races that season.
Another tragic irony to it. Now, almost certainly never know the real cause of the accident, but I guess one thing that we can certainly take away from it is the legacy in terms of safety.
Yes, a lot of years went into trying to investigate the cause of the accident, and I don't think anybody's ever been really, really satisfied definitively with what happened. But what did come out of it was a lot of effort going into ensuring that an accident like that wouldn't happen again, that the cars became very much safer, that the circuits were made very much safer, the drivers concentrated very hard on working together and going to inspect the circuits. The designers worked hard on making the cars more secure. So that's a very, very big legacy.
Well, I want to pick up with Johnny and David just briefly on a shot we saw when Adrian was talking there, where we showed Senna lifting the flag on the podium in Brazil in 1991, when he'd done the last 7 laps just in 6th gear, and the physicality taken out of him meant that he could barely raise the flag. I mean, it was a measure of the kind of driver he was, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was almost like he sort of had an out-of-body experience as well. He sort of commented on as well, but he couldn't touch him before he got to the podium, and I think that was just how intense he was in racing, and that didn't change from his very early karting days, Formula 4. It was all the way through, but it was how he adapted. That was what was impressive.
Yeah, and also if you've ever had cramp like that, you know there's very little that you can do. The fact that he actually walked up there and lifted that flag, having had cramp like that, just told me his mind was so strong. I think that's what really set him apart.
Wonderful. OK, thanks, chaps. Right, join us in a couple of minutes as Bruno takes one of Ayrton's old cars around the track where his uncle achieved one of his most glorious victories.
We had a lot of times with sports and with just pranks in general. He was full of playing pranks onto people. His favorite one was throwing some pepper or some chili on people's food. So you have really lots of fun seeing you run off to drink some water, and you just put some pepper on the rim of your glass as well, and you're just full of those pranks.
Well, welcome back to the F1 show, where we're rounding off Senna Week, joined by a live studio audience and our special guests, Johnny Herbert, David Brabham and Richard Williams.
Now, Johnny was on track the day Ayrton won the European Grand Prix at Donington in 1993, an epic victory. And we took his nephew Bruno back on a slightly drier day to join our boys for the honour of driving the great man's cars.
For me, I had the opportunity to meet the man in so many ways other people didn't. And even though I was only a kid, so I obviously didn't get to see everything about him. I have only really good memories. Each era has a different challenge, and I think Ayrton obviously mastered the challenges of that era, and you can see how difficult they were.
A magnificent bit of driving by Senna, who's now in 2nd place.
These cars were definitely more labor-intensive to drive, so the drivers had to, nurse the cars, not break the gearboxes, not over-rev the engine, and they were still having to race on the limit.
And Senna is through. Incredible.
Ayrton really showed what he was all about when he drove this car, and then he went on to do great things in Formula 1.
He's not about to be world champion this year. He will undoubtedly be world champion in the future.
Well, here for the privilege of driving two of Ayrton's old cars. I'm driving the Lotus 98T and the Tolman they drove for his first year in '84. Last time I drove a car like this was a few years ago, so very different feel, but I mean, the car is running so smooth, and you just have to nurse it and just drive it nicely until you get the hang of everything. The seating position is so different, where you're sitting near the front axle, so when you steer, you can feel the movement of the car much more directly under you. But again, the rear is a bit more dull. You cannot feel what the rear is doing so easily. And today is obviously a very cold day, so not the ideal day for a fun drive like this. It was such an amazing experience. You don't really understand how you feel before you drive these cars. And first, as a race driver, you feel like there's like overwhelming amount of things you have to get used to again, totally different from what it is nowadays. And really have to get used to the gearbox. And because these cars are such priceless pieces of kit, you don't want to grind gears, you don't want to make any mistakes, you want to drive them as hard as possible without being too aggressive. And the Lotus is a complete beast. The Toleman is such an honest car. You can drive, you can slide it a little bit more. It has less grip than the Toleman, but still lots of power, lots of grunt on the engine. So yeah, it was very special. I think it's hard to describe exactly what it feels to be driving some of Ayrton's cars. And fortunately for me, I've been driving some of his cars for a long time now. First time was when I was 10 years ago. The first time I drove one of his cars, and it just brings you so many memories. When I was driving behind Martin, and he was driving the Lotus, and I could see the car. I never thought I was going to see that car on the track next to me. And when you drive it, it's so surreal. When you're like next to it and you're seeing the car rolling, and oh my God, that's just amazing as well. I'm sure this will be always with me. You know, I think these are the opportunities you never know if you're going to get again. These cars are very special cars, so well maintained, so well kept, and by people who love them. And it's just a privilege for me to be able to hop on and do what I like to do.
Fabulous stuff with Bruno, and you can see more from our experience at Donington as part of Sky Sports F1's coverage of the Spanish Grand Prix. Now, back to Donington. Johnny Herbert, typical summer's day, it's pouring with rain. Yeah. And this is the grid for the 1993 European Grand Prix, where I've highlighted and marked you right there.
You can see me, at least.
Just about. But we also want to focus on this man right here. Ayrton Senna, starting fourth on the grid, treacherous conditions, but look what he does.
Exactly. He doesn't get off the line particularly well, as you can see, but then he knows it's going to be down this outside. So he's trying to go past Michael Schumacher as we go into Redgate. But then you see Michael just coming over. He responds. He has to brake and pull out of it as he gets on the white line. But quick as a flash, he's thinking, right, what have I got to do next? He goes across the track to the inside. This is where the grip is normally on the outside. But he also knows to get the traction, it's on the inside, and that's exactly what he does.
So he's already got past Michael Schumacher. It's Carl Wendlinger next as we head down to, I think, part of the best part of the Donington circuit, the Craner Curve. So I'm not going to highlight that. I'm going to put a little arrow in here, Johnny, and just show you. 3 cars, all going to go round the inside. That's the racing line, yeah?
Exactly. But as we saw going into Redgate, the grip is on the outside line. And what does he do? He throws the car, probably does another 10K as he goes round the outside there of Carl Wendlinger, getting himself into third. Magical.
How does he know that grip's there? What experience has Ayrton Senna got of Donington?
Formula 3. That is where he's learnt all this sort of experience back in the day. British Grand Prix. Does the same thing here, round the outside of our Damon Hill. Same thing, because all the grip is there. Now he's got one guy in front.
And who is it? Alain Prost out in the lead. Ayrton Senna following Prost. Senna, Prost always have great battles. There's one place he's going to have to go, but he surely can't go around the outside this time.
Well, you wouldn't have thought so. And again, he comes down as we go into the chicane, but it's the drive that he gets through, and especially here on the exit, where Alain sort of scrabbling around a little bit. As we go into the hairpin, Adelaide hairpin, up the inside, exactly where all the grip is. So as soon as he's down the inside, he knows the job is done, and Alain really can't respond.
He's kind of done a professor on the professor there, really, hasn't he? He's thought about it, he knows where the grip is, and he has shown us one of the great laps in Formula One. From 5th place, when he got blocked off by Michael Schumacher, at the end of the lap to be leading, and of course going on to win a Grand Prix, which, to be fair to you, you finished 4th in that day.
It was one pit stop, and that was all that I needed. But remember, this man wasn't in the fastest car either.
Certainly wasn't, but he made it look so special. Thanks ever so much, Johnny. We have a question. Carl, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Good man. You have a question for our esteemed panel about Ayrton Senna this evening.
Yeah, that'd be great. Gents, Senna's driving style and how it put him ahead of his competitors, his technique of repeatedly punching or dabbing on the throttle through corners, it gave him faster corner speeds compared with the more accelerate style. Do you think this style would have made Ayrton a perfect driver for the blown diffuser era we have just come out of, in which Seb has dominated so well using an early throttle technique?
Absolutely brilliant question, that. Thanks ever so much, Carl, and well remembered as well. Johnny, 20 years on, could Ayrton Senna have done a Sebastian Vettel?
Well, I mentioned the karting, the choking of the carburettor. Turbo era. He was the only one who used to pump the throttle to get the turbo spinning, so he didn't have the lag. I think he would have adapted without any issues whatsoever, and he would have still been a very scary proposition for all the other drivers. I think it was that pure natural skill would have enabled him to do that, no issues.
What say you, Carl?
It would have been a brilliant competition to see Seb and Senna with their similar styles, but I think he would have adapted.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that one. Thank you very much indeed. Come with me. We have David with another question here. Good evening.
Hi, Crofty. Hi. Panel, if Sky F1 gave you a time machine and you could travel back in time, which of Senna's laps would you like to see again, and where would you like to see it from?
Oh, can I answer this one first, please? I'd like to see all the laps of the Brazilian Grand Prix in 1991. I'd be the man cheering the loudest with a caipirinha in my hand somewhere in the grandstand at Interlagos. Would you join me for a drink?
Absolutely, mate.
Excellent. The two of us in the grandstand along with about 90 million other Brazilians. But, Johnny, where would you go?
I would probably have to go back to Adelaide, actually, back in the late 80s, probably 89, because, again, very tricky track, very, very bumpy at the same time. And it was just, again, wonderful to watch his ability come to the fore.
Well, for me, I think you have to go to Monaco qualifying. I think that those laps that he used to do there were sensational, particularly the time when he was like 1.4 seconds quicker than Prost. And I think he had problems before that, so it was literally that one lap he had to do, and he just took himself to an even higher level than he had done before.
And Richard, come on, you were in the press room, Richard. I think watching most of Ayrton Senna's laps, but which one would actually get you out of your comfy chair?
It's an obvious choice, but Donington 93, from his point of view, because I think what they will know and what most of us don't really know is how, unless you're at the front, and if it's raining, how little the drivers can see. And I would like to be there in his seat to see him going past those four guys and to see how much he could see as he was doing it.
I'd have been in the stands with you, Crofty, with a caipirinha, I think. That would have been brilliant.
I choose all four.
Yes.
Excellent, good news.
Get me that time machine.
Right, coming up, we'll pay tribute to Roland Ratzenberger, but first we will also hear from the current crop of drivers on the legacy of Ayrton Senna.
Well, Ayrton was, for me, the most iconic figure in the sport, and he was I feel he is the driver still today that everyone aspires to be. Like, you know, even though they say they might suggest another driver, I know deep down inside I feel they want to be like Ayrton.
I admire him a lot of what he did as a sportman, not only as a driver. I think he brought a lot to Formula One in terms of personality. His personality was very authentic, and this time in these generations it's difficult to see an authentic personality such an Ayrton.
Monaco qualifying when he was 1.5 seconds quicker than Alain, and that just doesn't happen in motor racing and at this level of motor racing. So an immense talent taken away from us far too soon, and as I've said recently, you know, rock stars and legends are always taken away from us far too soon.
Welcome back to the F1 show, where we're joined by three people who knew Ayrton Senna so well: Johnny Herbert, David Brabham and Richard Williams.
Now, as part of Senna Week, we've been showing our documentary, The Last Teammate, where David travelled back to Imola with Damon Hill to give their unique take on the tragic events.
I think everyone felt for you, David. You know, everyone, as a racing driver, was shocked to have lost someone like Roland. I knew Roland pretty well from junior races and watching him coming up through the ranks. He was similar age to me.
Yeah.
So we were all pretty stunned, but it's a pretty awful thing to lose a teammate. But you had to deal with that the following day.
Yeah, it's just one of those situations where you don't know what to do, what to think. I've never been in that experience before, and you know, you don't really truly know anything unless you've experienced it. So I just ended up, you know, being so numb about the whole thing. I wasn't sure what to do, you know, whether I should be racing the next day or not, or, you know, there was so many emotions flying around your body and your mind, and you know, everything changes just like that, you know. And it's but it changed for a lot of people, yeah, for sure. And everybody having to get in the car the next day, you know, certainly was a struggle for me, but I'm sure it was a struggle for the whole grid.
It certainly put a different complexion on being a racing driver. Going out, it seemed not questionable, but it seemed confusing to be doing this job, because at that point it seems like a job. You know, it just seems like something you've got to do. You said you were going to race, and now you're going to get back in the car, but it didn't seem right in some way to be just carrying on when you're so close to having lost someone.
To get in the car and keep going was not a selfish thing. It was nothing to do with me. It was actually more to do with the team and help change things, you know? Yeah.
In a sense, it's the only way you can respond, is to keep doing what your original intention is. In some way, it seemed to me anyway. I mean, the mood throughout the paddock was somber, but for Ayrton and for the team, I think everybody just wanted to do the best job they could, and just get the thing back on the rails.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. You know, like I said, it is a really confusing time, but you know, I felt like I had to keep the focus, keep the team together, try and get us through the situation, and that's what you're trying to do. You go, how do I best deal with this situation? And that was what came in my mind about how I deal with it, and it did. It did help start to shift things a little bit, just a little bit, but you know, enough to get the momentum going again.
Very stressful time.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, David, it certainly was a stressful time, but what was it like making that programme? Was it in some way kind of therapy, if you like, quite cathartic?
Yeah, in some way. I mean, it was heavy. Once I got down there, all the feelings, emotions started to come back. You know, it's 20 years, so it's a long time, and you kind of go on with your life, and then all of a sudden you go back there and you start trying to remember things, because there was quite a bit I didn't remember. And some of those started to come back to me, and obviously with Damon there, we start chatting, and you know, it just got a kind of heavy feeling to it, you know. But for me, at that time, I never sort of burst out crying or sort of wept or anything like that. I kind of felt like I had to be strong and keep going. So for me, it was a little bit of therapy, I think.
Sort of part of the grieving process.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. Now, what impact do you think that Ayrton's death had on Roland's? Because some would argue that it totally overshadowed it, but others may say that, well, actually, in a way, it's helped us remember Roland as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to look at it. You know, people think that maybe that Roland has been kind of forgotten, but you know, if that weekend Ayrton didn't die and it was just Roland, would we be still talking about him in this sense? And I don't think we would. I think the fact that he did die with Senna, the Senna name will help carry his name for the future.
And something else that means we'll never forget him was the legacy of safety, much like Ayrton, and the hands device coming in as a result.
Well, there was a lot of things that came in. I mean, I do believe out of a tragedy, some good things come out of it. And definitely that weekend has saved a lot of drivers' lives in the future. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But I mean, you have to look at those cars. There's no protection around the neck at all. There's no hands device. Nowadays, when you sit in, the safety is so much better. And a lot of that has come from that weekend. So in some way we can be thankful, as tragic as it is, but it's definitely saved not just, I think, drivers, but marshals, things like that, because, you know, there were a lot of people hurt that weekend, not just drivers.
So that's his memory on a wider scale. But what about you personally, your enduring memory of him? Is it that big smile? Is it the fact that he finally did realise his dream and drove an F1 car?
For sure. I mean, for sure he died with a smile on his face. There's no doubt about it. He was so happy. His journey, as we heard, you know, 3 years for Senna, and it was 8, 9 years, whatever it was for Roland. And for him to take that journey and finally get there was something magical for him. There's no doubt about it. And he just beamed. And obviously it was tragic that it happened, but at the same time, he was very, very happy, and that smile will always stay with me.
And I guess if we can all realise our dreams and leave a legacy, then it's a life well lived. Johnny, you remember Roland well as well?
Yeah, very much so. You know, the Formula 4 Festival was always sort of the big event of my early career, and he won it the following year. And I always remember sitting down with him, and we were sort of discussing where we were going to go with our careers. Unfortunately, he did a bit of touring car after that Formula 4, but then of course we met again in Japan when we raced out there, and he was doing very, very well in sports cars. And of course he eventually worked very, very hard to get his dream, which was to Formula 1. Unfortunately, it was just a bit too short.
All right, thanks, Johnny. Crofty has some more questions for us.
I have a tweet from Mr. Dilkington, who says, I'm 22 and was never fortunate enough to watch Ayrton Senna live, yet he's one of my sporting heroes. Speaks volumes of the man. Well, I'm only 24, kind of. And John here is...
23.
But you're a massive Ayrton Senna fan.
Yes, I am. Sadly, at the age of 3 when he passed away. But growing up watching the Formula 1, everyone was referring to him as a true legend. So I wanted to know more about him. And with films like Senna coming out, it makes everyone feel like this only happened yesterday, even though it's been 20 years.
Absolutely. We'll talk more about Senna the movie in a moment. Lois Marketing says Senna was not only the best driver in F1 history, but one of its most interesting, fun and intriguing personalities. And Joshua Sutil, to so many people, he was more than just a driver. I doubt F1 will ever see such an amazing man, the greatest. So it kind of got me thinking with my friends over here, could we remake a movie about a Formula 1 driver? And if it wasn't Ayrton Senna next time, who could we have as our subject matter? I'm going to pick on this man here first. Who could we have? What Formula 1 driver will we put in a movie?
I'd like to see something about Schumacher, actually, given what's happened to him and, you know, how he sort of came up the ranks and everything else.
Yeah,
So,
Schumacher the movie, I would certainly love to see that, and we keep praying that Michael will make a recovery. What about you, sir?
What about dear old Sterling Moss?
Sterling Moss the movie.
We've got to have Sterling with all the crumpet. Great character.
One of the greatest, of course, never to win a world championship. Let's just go over here to this lady here. Who would we have in a movie?
Oh, blimey, I don't know.
I think it's Seb Vettel. I think what he's done has been fantastic these last few years, and it'd be great to see his side of it, really. You know, everyone's either got a positive opinion or a negative one, and I'd be keen to see what it was like for him outside of the car.
Yeah, Multi-21 the movie, and one more at the back here.
Well, I think our Nigel, all of those that lived through the Senna, Nigel Prost era, that would make a fantastic movie to see the battle rather than what was reflected in the movie, which was just Senna Prost.
What's your name, sir?
Mark Smithers.
Right, me and Mark, we're going to start writing the screenplay now. Mansell, the man, the moustache, the movie.
And Crofty, of course, you've already had a movie made about you.
Well, yeah, to be fair, you know, I know a little bit about Hollywood blockbusters. We were #1 at the UK box office for a weekend with Planes. It's on Sky Sports, on Sky Movies now, if you want to watch it, please do.
It was just an animation, though, wasn't it, Crofty, after all? Now, in a couple of minutes, we'll hear what Ayrton Senna meant to Brazil. But first, thoughts of some of today's drivers, including one of his compatriots.
Well, I think Ayrton is definitely a kind of king, you know, for us in Brazil. So he's such a important name that we have now, and he was such an important man for Brazil.
Senna was one of the best of all time, you know, and I watched a lot of his races. I remember the tragic weekend in Imola. I remember what I was doing, and yeah, he did so much for the sport and for the fans, and he'll forever be a legend of the sport.
Welcome back to the F1 show with our guests Johnny Herbert, David Brabham and Richard Williams, as we are drawing to a close a very special week in honour of three-time world champion Ayrton Senna.
Well, as you saw earlier, I was lucky enough to travel over to Italy on Wednesday for the Imola commemorations. And one of the tens of thousands there was Ayrton's niece and Bruno's little sister, Paola. We're here because it's the 20th anniversary of the accident today. What do you remember of that time?
Oh, it was a very, very sad day for my family. I remember it very well. And since I was a child, they wanted to put me away and protect me from the environment. So I didn't actually go to the funeral. Well, it was a shock for all of us.
And the turnout we've seen today must mean a lot to the family as well.
Since I've been here, since I arrived in Italy, the Italians have shown so much love and passion, and there's people coming from all over the world. It's like so impressive. I'm astonished. Yes.
And why do you think people remember him so fondly?
His humanity touched people's hearts, I guess, in some way, and he's still alive there. So maybe that's why there's so much love from people. He represented a good side of Brazil that wasn't on display at the time, I guess. And he inspired people to see what there was some good in Brazil too, despite of the problems that we were having. I think somehow he still does.
What do you remember most about him?
I remember when he spent most of the year away on races, but when he got home, he was really happy to see his family again, reconnect. So there was this big, he was so warm towards us, and he hugged the children, and he was lifting us and making this big, big celebration. It was like Christmas. He wanted me to learn English when I was little, so he saw that I like to watch the same movie over and over again, the cartoons. So he bought all the cartoons in English and brought this big, big case for me. So I spent like the whole holidays watching movies. And he was so kind. He was always giving us gifts and being really nice. He had this playful side of him, and that was around when he was with his family, so he was more relaxed. And we had so much fun. So I guess he had this serious side and this fun, relaxed side that he could enjoy when he was with the family. So it was very special.
That's very much Ayrton Senna, the serious side and the fun side. Here was a man that raced to win, hugely competitive, thrived on the adrenaline. But yet you go to Tamburello, you go to Imola and you see the statue, Richard, and he's deep in thought, contemplating, as if he's got the weight of a nation on his shoulders.
I thought that was a great choice of statue. You know, it would have been very easy to make a statue of Ayrton Senna on the podium going like that, or in the cockpit going like that. Instead, they had one of him in that very kind of reflective pose, which I think sums up a lot of his appeal to people, that people saw that this was a man with a lot of depth to him, you know, with the kind of profundity that, you know, you don't often see in sports heroes. You know, he allowed himself to be seen that way. You know, he talked about his faith, he talked about all kinds of things like that. And I think really that's what people kind of dialed into, and that's what made people feel that here was somebody special.
He was a superstar. He was our superstar in the world of Formula One, but to Brazilians, he was very much their godlike superstar in a sporting capacity. Was that something that sat well with him, the fact that the country, everything he did, Brazil was willing him on to do it well?
Yes, I think he was very comfortable with that, indeed. I think he felt very Brazilian, and he was very happy representing the people of Brazil at a very difficult time for the country. The economy was in a terrible mess. You know, they'd had big political problems, and the football team hadn't won the World Cup for 24 years, although they were about to. But, you know, that banner that somebody held up, you know, when his coffin was being taken through the streets of São Paulo saying, "Thank you for making our Sundays so happy." That really sums up what he did for the people of Brazil. Every other Sunday, they could switch on their television, and there was a very good chance they were going to see him waving the flag on the lap of honour at the end.
And that's why, when he won in '91 at Interlagos, when he finally nailed that home Grand Prix victory, despite the cramp, the exhaustion, the fatigue he was suffering from, he had to reach for the flag because he had to celebrate with that flag and enjoy that moment as a Brazilian national.
Yes, it was such a kind of explosion of joy and such a release of something that had been pent up in him. And, you know, that's what people really loved about him, I think, that he was not afraid to show his emotions. We like that in our sports stars, and we like to see the emotion in what they do. And you could see the emotion in the way he drove, the way the car moved around, you know, on the track. And that's the other thing that people really got about him, I think.
Now, you're the sort of man, I would gladly swap places with you any day of the week, because you write about sport and you write about rock music as well. And you've met Bruce Springsteen, you lucky man. But is Ayrton Senna the sporting rock superstar?
Yeah, I suppose he is, in the sense that everybody knew who he was, you know, and he had that terrific appeal to all kinds of people. And there was just something something that connected, about him that, people get with rock stars, I guess.
And will there be a time where we see a sportsman unite a nation in the way that Ayrton Senna did as well?
It may be a country that we haven't thought about yet, because that's the thing, really. I think it needs to be somebody who makes the people of his country feel that he represents them at a time when they need some kind of figurehead.
Very much so. Richard, stay there. I've got a blindingly good question. Come this way for you. From Jane here. Hello, Jane.
Hello, hi.
Microphone's for you, by the way. I've got one right here. Go for it.
I wanted to ask, had Gilles Villeneuve lived, how much of a battle would there have been between him, Prost and Senna?
Had Gilles Villeneuve had survived that accident at Zolder in '82, Senna, Prost, Villeneuve, we ought to put this to Richard first.
Well,
what do you think?
You could certainly sell tickets for it. That's for sure. It would be a great attraction, and it would be a fantastic battle. And I think, Senna, Prost, Villeneuve, you've got three quite different types there, to say the least. Different characters, different ways of driving a racing car. But boy, it would have been exciting. I think you'd probably say that Prost would win.
See, here's my theory, and that we could have a pub debate about this one a little later. Yep. Might need several bottles of red wine before we decide it. But Senna and Villeneuve spend all their time, Jane, dicing for the lead. Prost just sits back, especially in a modern-day car, conserves his tyres, and then nails it in the final few laps. What do you think?
Probably would happen that way, yes.
We think so. Right. Thank you very much indeed, Jane. Johnny, David, what do you think? Villeneuve, Prost, Senna?
I think probably from raw talent, I'd probably have to go with Villeneuve. If he would have been able to do it over a complete season, would have been probably the problem. But over a season, I would have gone for Ayrton, for sure.
What was it like to race in Brazil? Because whenever you raced in Brazil and Ayrton was on the grid, let's face it, there was only one person who wanted to win.
Yeah, and there was a big shift from, I remember before we lost him, that the crowd were absolutely mad, basically from daylight very early on. They were always staying late at night as they were watching the teams. But of course, it changed massively after that, and we've never, ever got back to the same sort of euphoria that was always there with the Brazilian crowd. They're still very, very good, they're still very, very passionate, but Ayrton just stood out in such a big way because of everything he did for the children.
And he was deaf. If you look at some of the bus that you're after his death, it said not gods don't die. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement, but I'm intrigued by the sort of juxtaposition of his character. You saw this ruthless racer do anything, win at all costs, and yet hugely compassionate guy who was so concerned about driver safety as well. How do you reconcile those two?
Well, I found it fascinating, to be honest with you, because you're right. I mean, he put that helmet on, and if Prost was right next to him, he was incredibly ruthless, wasn't he? I mean, it was his way or no one else's way. And yet, someone would have an accident on the road, and he'd be the first to go there because compassionately, he had a massive amount of compassion about him as well. So there was these very two different contrasts between the two personalities that we got to know about Ayrton.
How do you think he found then what happened in '89 and '90? Because we know Ron Dennis said to him, I was disappointed with what you did there in '90. But for Senna, could he weigh that up in his mind? That was it. I wanted to win. I have no regrets. I don't think about it. How do you weigh that up in his mind as well? It's just the ruthlessness?
There's a story to it as well.
There's a big story right behind it. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, it's not purely what was going on into that first turn. It was everything that had gone on. I remember the year before, but also in the drivers' briefings.
Yeah.
There was always a fight with Ballet and Senna. I would say 99% of the races, and what was going on with the pole position, then it was sort of swapped around because
I was going to say, we'd love to be in those drivers' briefings.
But of course, that led on to what happened, from what happened to the year before to everything with what was going on with that pole position kept getting swapped over because he went for second and then they swapped it again. And then he did what he did going into the race. And Prost only admitted it, I think, about 4 or 5 years later, maybe more, where he did actually squeeze Ayrton going into the chicane, which I always thought he did as well. So he was ruthless as well. It wasn't the...
You're all a bit ruthless.
The cuddly bit. Well,
well maybe not you, John.
No, yeah, I know.
You're just a cuddly little teddy bear.
Oh, bless.
Oh, the bromance. What a moment. Right, well, Senna was the master of Monaco, winning in the Principality 6 times on a notoriously tricky circuit. His most memorable qualifying performance, and perhaps the best of all time, was in 1988.
Sometimes I think I know some of the reasons why I do the things I do. Monte Carlo, 88 in qualifying session, Saturday afternoon. I was already on pole. Then I was by half a second, and then 1 second, and I was going. And I was going, and I was going, and I was going. Suddenly, I was about 2 seconds faster than anyone else. I was kind of driving it by instinct. And I was in a different dimension. I was like in a tunnel. Well beyond my conscious understanding. Some moments when I am actually driving just detach me completely from anything else.
Well, thanks to McLaren's official YouTube channel for the use of that film. And I just want to talk to you two, to David and Richard, about, yes, that was a fantastic qualifying lap, but 55 seconds ahead in the race, he put it into the wall at Portier. What were your thoughts at the time? What did you think? What was going through his head? It was just too much? It was too clear?
Well, what I was thinking, I was like, my jaw was open. It was like, you just couldn't believe what you were just witnessing, to be honest with you. I mean, he just seemed to be on this mission that whole weekend and was pushing and pushing to the limits. I don't know whether or not he was trying to find that headspace that he had in qualifying in the race, because he just seemed to just keep going and going, pulling away. And then he made a mistake, and that hurt him big time. That really did hurt him, didn't it?
Well, Ron Dennis says that they told him to slow down because he was so far ahead and there was no point in carrying on, you know, at the incredible speed that he was going at. And that once he'd been told that, the concentration went slightly because he'd been in that zone. And where he was a place where great musicians go, when they say, you spend all your life learning the technique, you know, you acquire all this technique, and then at the kind of moment of truth, you forget it. It just goes, and all you do is you're just there in the moment.
He knew,
and that's where he was.
Because he went back to his flat, didn't he? He didn't go back to the paddock, didn't speak to anyone, but he went on to win 6 of the next 8 races. He'd learnt his lesson, hadn't he?
Quite wonderful, driving on pure instinct. And I know that Crofty and Johnny are going to talk us through the 1990 quali lap in Monaco.
Yes, because my friends around here have all decided that one Ayrton Senna lap for pole in Monaco is not enough, is it now? No, we need another one, Johnny Herbert. So let's go to 1990 and try and experience a little bit of what it's like to ride on board with Ayrton Senna in a vastly different car to ones we see today on the streets.
I know. Well, you look at that, just that sheer length of that suspension. You actually do, I think the whole picture there is about as wide as the modern cars are nowadays.
And look at the size of the steering wheel.
Unbelievable. And of course, we've got to remember, of course, the circuit is actually like that. It's got a big crown as well. So there's only a very, very small racing line.
Right, let's stop drawing arrows on our screen. Let's play this lap. And you can see how violent and how bumpy it is as well. Stick shift gear as well. And coming out of Saint-Devot, his first little moment.
A little moment, probably cold tyres. But again, it's how stiff they are, which is why you're seeing that camera shudder like it is. But as we go into Casino, you just see how precise he is with that steering. Mostly there.
That was a really bad time to slow it down because the camera couldn't keep up.
It's the way he's able to get how close he gets to the barrier again. He's always kissing everything, everywhere. And it's the precision. No fighting with the steering wheel. It's all very smooth.
Look at that. There is the Armco. And he's taking it absolutely superbly through there. Right, here we go again.
And as we go down to Mirabeau, it'll be interesting actually, so you can see the right lock. Yeah, there goes, there's the lock there. It goes quite high, about sort of 8 inches high. But then you just get on the power, and as you go down to the old Lowe's hairpin, as it used to be called. Again, it's how much lock he does on that steering wheel. It's actually his hand is actually at the top of the steering wheel itself. So he's got maximum lock, and you can see how much it is turning on the wheel as well. But it's the commitment to release it, and it's absolutely perfectly executed. Still fighting the cars. He does so bumpy as we go into Portier itself. It's a lovely little drift as we go into the tunnel itself.
Well, this is where you can relax a little bit, but mentally he's preparing for the next big challenge, and this is the old Nouvelle chicane.
Yeah, exactly. And again, he knows how important it is to get the drive out of that corner. It's so bumpy, but he gets through those gears, just quickly puts his hand on the steering wheel, little shift as he goes through to back there. Now, this swimming pool area is really bumpy from this point on, and it's really difficult to stop the car, but he's able to do that again with this steering wheel that is just very smooth. This was so difficult. The old corner there at Rascasse, which is really difficult, especially on that exit, to get the drive. Got held up a little bit here, but it's how close he is to perfection. It's just always there, and it's that steering wheel, I always say, it's how smooth he is and how precise.
Absolutely unbelievable. It just makes me dizzy watching that, quite frankly, but Johnny, I could watch it again and again. Right, my tablet. Thank you very much indeed. We have some tweets. QVC beckons for you, my lovely. That's fantastic. We have some tweets from you this evening. First up, Senna was a pioneer for the sport and a benchmark for drivers past, present and future to aspire towards, which I think is a beautifully put point. Anna's Martin says, I'm Brazilian and will never forget Ayrton Senna's legacy. I will never forget the 1st of May 1994. The whole country stopped. And Ryan WBU says, ruthless on the track, gentle and kind off it. Such an amazing human being. What he could do with a Formula One car was just magic. I can't disagree with any of those sentiments whatsoever. Hashtag SkyF1, please keep them coming. It's great to share your memories and thoughts of Ayrton Senna tonight.
Wonderful stuff. Lovely tweets there, Crofty. Thank you. So, in a couple of minutes, we'll find out where Senna stands in the pantheon of sporting greats. One man who raced against him in the early days is our very own Martin Brundle.
His determination and his attention to detail. The last race in Thruxton in F3, which he needed to win to take the championship, he decided to, I don't know if you know this story, he decided that he wanted his first lap to be really fast. He didn't want to wait for the engine to warm up, so he had the radiator taped up. And then I was following, and I was in third actually, he was in first, but I could see him. So he slackens off his shoulder belt and he leans out of the car to take tape off the radiators. And the car's doing this at like 150 miles an hour into the last chicane at Thruxton.
Unbelievable.
As he's busy taking
the tape off the radiator too. That's pretty extreme.
So he had one lap with extra power because his engine was up to temperature.
Amazing.
Welcome back to this very special F1 show with our guests Johnny Herbert, David Brabham and Richard Williams. And I believe Crofty is in the audience with a couple of questions.
Not just a couple of questions, Nats, but a couple of feet here. One of these feet has been to Silverstone today and is looking a bit scruffy. One belongs to Alex, who has the smartest shoes on the planet. Well done, sir. You've dressed up splendidly.
Thank you.
Good job. You were going to ask a question tonight and you came dressed for the occasion.
Absolutely.
What is it?
Is Lewis Hamilton the modern-day Senna minus Senna's win-at-all-costs attitude?
Ooh. You could argue sometimes Lewis has got a win-at-all-costs attitude and he will go for it all the time, but is he the modern-day Ayrton Senna? Who wants to answer this one first? Panel.
I think he is in some regard, isn't he, guys? I think he's the ultimate racer. We know what he can do in qualifying and he get absolutely everything from it, which is what Ayrton did. You know, we know his colours of his helmet is related to that. And then I think, as we're seeing at the moment, and I think personally what we saw in Bahrain with his teammate being on the softer tyre, had the advantage, he had the harder tyre, and he drove away from him effectively. So we're seeing sort of that Senna-esque coming into Lewis's situation. From a point of view, would he take off his teammate if he had to? That one we're going to have to wait and see. I probably think he wouldn't.
Well, we might see it this season, might we, Richard? If things stay this close.
He might have to. Alex, what do you think?
He might have to.
I think he is. I remember that period in 07, 08 when he was right on the edge, but and there was Senna-esque tendencies, but not right on the edge of what Senna was capable of at times, and it was brilliant.
I think
Phenomenal.
he exhibits the best qualities of Ayrton Senna at times for me on that one. Great question.
It's a good question. It's certainly something that Lewis seems to enjoy, those comparisons being drawn, isn't it?
Yes, I think so. It's so interesting that we're still living with a generation of Formula One drivers who grew up worshipping him. That won't last forever. You know, there will be a generation who don't remember him.
They're standing all around you, Richard.
Do you know, there's another thing as well that strikes. I know Natalie and I, whenever we speak to him in the pen after races, particularly when Esteban had his spin, Lewis is always a driver who comes in and says, is Esteban okay?
Yeah.
Is so-and-so okay?
Very caring.
He's got that compassionate side that we saw in Senna as well.
Yeah, but I think we know that when we sort of do interviews with him, and we even chat with him as fellow drivers, because he has got that nice, gentle side to him. But of course, he has got that sort of edge that he needs, and he knows he needs that edge to be able to win himself in hopefully a second World Championship.
OK. Well, that's the opinion of our studio guest. We put the same question to Murray Walker. So who did he think is the driver on the current grid who's most like Ayrton Senna?
I would say that Fernando Alonso has got a lot of the characteristics in terms of determination, personality and ability that Ayrton Senna has got. But outside of Alonso, no. Ayrton Senna is always going to be seen as one of the greatest drivers of all time, and rightly so. 3 times world champion, umpteen victories, 41 if I remember correctly, a record number of pole positions. His personality, he leaves a legacy of much love and respect because of what he had done for safety, what he had done for charities in Brazil, because unbeknown to most people, he contributed an enormous amount of money and time to charities in Brazil. But whilst that is the plus side of the Senna legend, there is also a minus side, and that is particularly to the people who are deeply versed in Formula One, the fact that he was an utterly ruthless driver. He believed that he had this God-given right to win, and that he should win and that he must win, and nothing else should stand in his way to stop him winning. And he did things during his career which were not admirable, not at all admirable. But overall, you've got to remember him as a great racing driver and a quite incredible personality.
Well, David, were you surprised that he compared him to Fernando Alonso there?
No, not really. I think, you know, Ayrton is Ayrton, Lewis is Lewis, Fernando is Fernando. They're all incredible, but they're all quite different. They're all, you know, incredibly fast, committed. You know, you admire what they do, but they are individual as well. So I think everybody will have their own opinion.
We do love making comparisons, don't we?
You do.
Just let them be. Crofty, what have you got?
I think we're going to make some more comparisons down here as well. Tim, Kieran, blimey, got it right. Thankfully, I've got it right. You've got a question first.
That's right, yeah. I'm interested to hear the panel's thoughts on the comparisons between Ayrton and Michael Schumacher. I think they share quite a lot of the same characteristics, but what I find different is that with Ayrton, a lot of people think with the things that happened at Suzuka, they still think he's a genius, where with Michael, you know, things like Jerez, he gets maybe a bit of a bad rap, in my opinion, and I'm intrigued to think what the panel, what their thoughts are on that.
Johnny?
Really good question.
Yeah, I was his teammate, yes. He was very fair. Not. It's a different one for me, and I can see sort of your point, because I only think there's only a couple of occasions with Ayrton that did things wrong, which we go back to Suzuka again. I can't really think of another one personally. But then with Michael, there was always in the back of his mind, and that was even before he'd even got into the car at Monaco. The parking he tried to do very badly at Rascasse. It was already premeditated that he was going to muck up Fernando Alonso's lap. So he's done it more often. Did it with Al Damon. He tried to do it with Jacques, but missed. And there's been other occasions where he's just driven, I think, beyond acceptability. in many respects, and I think he was a little bit worse. He would win at any single cost. Ayrton was a true racer and wanted to race and win, being the best. I think you want to argue with Suzuka, he did it because of what happened before, and everything, as I said before, was happening in the driver's briefing.
Yeah, there's certainly a bigger story to it, but was it premeditated? That's where it could be Schumacher-esque, if we're going to argue that one. But it's a brilliant question. Thanks ever so much. Meanwhile, to my right, we have another great question.
Yeah, I was wondering, with the dominance of Sebastian Vettel for the last 4 years, Schumacher's 7 titles, and then from a different era, Ascari and Fangio, where would Senna now lie in the greatest of all time?
Oh, the biggest what-if of them all, I think. Richard, you wrote something about this earlier this week.
Yes, it's impossible to compare drivers of different eras, but we do it all the time because we enjoy it. And he belongs in that very, very top echelon with, I'd go back to Nuvolari before the war, and Fangio and Moss, possibly, who never won a world championship, nevertheless, you know, was one of those magic drivers, and Jim Clark. You know, absolutely, Senna belonged with them.
We should actually ask for an audience vote on this
Oh,
one.
yeah.
Richard wrote earlier this week, Ayrton Senna would have won 7 world titles.
Well, you can argue that, you know.
Yeah, well, let's not argue it. Let's put it to the vote, Richard, here. Hands up, ladies and gentlemen. Show of hands. 7 world titles for Ayrton Senna had he lived. I think the yays have it on this one. The nays can go and find something else to do tonight.
You know what, Crofty? I just wanted to pick up. Alan Prost, interestingly, said that he thinks he would have won more titles had Senna not been around. But he also talked very fondly of him after his death and how that animosity had gone, even actually the year before he died, when Prost had stopped and Senna was still racing. They got over that animosity, and they seemed to be a fondness. You're looking at me, Richard, as though it may not have been completely fond.
I think they got over it after Prost retired. I think if Prost had carried on, that animosity would have carried on. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all.
But he's certainly on his foundation, isn't he? He's still very much in contact with the Senna family.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gents.
Well, Senna week might be over, but there's still plenty more to come, including this over the Spanish Grand Prix weekend.
A magnificent bit of driving by Senna.
The most important thing is to keep the good moments.
He was a mythic figure. He took his patriotism to a new level.
Ayrton Senna has driven an immaculate race.
His legend meant something to the whole world, not just our world of motorsport.
The Toman T184. This is the car that Ayrton Senna upset the establishment at the Monaco Grand Prix.
A little bit too much sideways there, Marty. Take it easy. There's Senna behind me. Haven't said that for a while.
To be riding behind that car and seeing from behind is just absolutely stunning.
I hope that in 50 years from now, somebody's pounding around here remembering the great Ayrton Senna.
So stacks to look forward to over the Spanish Grand Prix weekend. F1 comes home back to Europe. We've got practice one at 8:45 in the morning, so not an ungodly hour from the flyaways. And then the F1 show at 5 o'clock on Friday. Then on Saturday, quali at 12 noon. And on Sunday, track parade from 11:30, the race show at 12 and Paddock Live at 3:30. Cannot wait. And then we've got some classic races for you to enjoy. Japanese Grand Prix 1989 tonight after this show. Saturday, the British Grand Prix from 1981 at 9 o'clock, and Sunday, the USA Grand Prix at 1983. And then it goes on with the Japanese Grand Prix 96, Tuesday, Australian Grand Prix 96, and Wednesday, Spanish Grand Prix in 2012.
Well, I want to put a question to all three of you. If there's one image, one moment for you that sums up Ayrton Senna, what would it be?
I think Brazil. I think Brazil, when he won that race with all that cramp and everything else, but still had that strength to get up there, that first win at home as well. You know, you saw the massive amount of emotion from him, but also the crowd.
Richard, my favourite quote from your book is, the cultivation of humility wasn't a possibility in his workplace because it wouldn't have taken him to the places he needed to go. Is that your very kind way of saying he was arrogant and stubborn and would win at all costs?
Win at all costs, absolutely, yes. But you have to be like that.
Absolutely.
You know? There's no other way to be if you want to be one of those 22 guys. Not only one of the 22 guys on the grid, but the one who's going to win the World Championship.
And that attitude is why we're still talking about him today.
And for you, David, we also obviously marking the death of Roland that weekend as well. But what do you think he could have gone on to achieve?
Well, unfortunately, we're not going to know, but he had everything there. He was quite a complete driver, to be honest with you, and all he just needed was miles in the car, get up to experience and have a better car at the same time. But I'm pretty sure he could have done quite well.
Crofty, you've had some lovely tweets tonight. What else?
We've had such a great response. Thank you to everyone that's tweeted in. Nick DeVille says, when you say Senna, I instantly see his helmet stand out. His outstanding pace, one step ahead of the rest of the grid. Michael DDFMP says he won because of his driving, his passion and will, not because of his car. He showed he could win in all the cars that he drove. It's one of the reasons we love Donington 1993 as a great example of driving skill over the ability of the car. And Maddie A.L. Watts, thank you, Maddie, for this. My 5-month-old boy has Ayrton as his middle name. The legend still continues to the next generation. Talking of which, hello, Shane.
Hiya.
Got any kids?
Not as of yet.
Fancy having some kids? No, I mean, obviously not with me, but with your wife, yeah?
Of course.
Excellent. Would you call your child Ayrton?
I don't think the wife would have much to say about that.
Is she here?
She is.
Wife, come to the front. Come to the front. What's the missus' name?
Laura.
Laura. Would you allow your child to have the middle name of Ayrton?
I'd imagine so, if he really wanted it.
I think the first name would have to be Lewis, though.
Lewis Ayrton. What's your surname?
Lewis Ayrton Hockey.
Lewis Ayrton Hockey. I think we've started something here. You two might have to go and finish it later. But Ayrton as a middle name, fantastic.
Legacy is certainly a strong word, and his spirit certainly lives on in his nephew Bruno. We're delighted as part of the Sky F1 team. He's showing he's great on the track over at racing in Spa this weekend, but also great on camera. You know, he talks with such calm about his uncle, but about racing generally.
Yeah, and Ayrton was like that too, a most eloquent man. It was always really interesting to listen to him talk after a race, to hear him analysing in terms that, you know, we could understand, but it was at a very high level what he'd done. You know, he was just fascinating in that way, and you know, Bruno has something of that too.
Yeah. And we heard as well, you talk about the legacy, I mean, we had Jules Bianchi much earlier in the show saying, you know, I say thank you because I know if I crash now, I'm not likely to have a serious injury because of them, so we say thank you to them. It's an incredible legacy for both the drivers then to pass on.
Yeah, it is, because, you know, some good came out of it. You know, it was a shocking month, actually, because obviously we had Cole Veninger in Monaco have his crash, going to a coma for a month, and then we had Pedro Lamy, my teammate, end up in a little sort of pedestrian tunnel at Silverstone. So everything that went on through the safety, you know, has pretty much sort of helped no deaths in Formula One.
Always important to remember Roland as well, David.
Yeah, sure. I mean, he's part of that weekend that changed Formula One. You can't forget that.
I mean, it's quite incredible when you saw the crash with Esteban Gutierrez. You literally watched from behind your hands, but there was part of you that felt that he would walk away unscathed.
There have been half a dozen of those in recent years, haven't there, when you see the car and you think, you know, in earlier times, you'd have switched the television off, there would have been no chance of that person surviving. But now, thanks to the extraordinary technology, they shake their heads and get out, and it's wonderful to watch.
So last word from each of you. One last word that you'd remember Ayrton Senna by. Charisma?
I think it's just that sure, edgy driving.
Like you said, just listening to him, whenever he spoke, he seemed to hit the core of your soul. You know what I mean?
One word, Richard.
Emotion.
Emotion.
Emotion, I love it.
Well, it's been an emotional week on Sky F1, that's for sure. Thank you very much to our guests tonight, to Crofty and to all of you. We're now in Europe for the European leg of the season. We'll see you in Spain. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
He had the most talent, God-given talent of any driver I ever raced against.
He dominated the sport. He became the sport.
Ayrton Senna, the new world champion.
He's different, and he was different.
Oh my goodness, this is fantastic!
He was always the one who would go to the limits and sometimes beyond.
Kevin immediately! This is amazing!
Ayrton was above of everyone. He had this belief that he had a God-given right to win.
Ayrton Senna wins at Monaco for the 5th time.
The track in a racing car is extraordinarily special.
Wheel-to-wheel stuff. Look at this, they're almost touching.
The most important thing to all of us is to keep the good moments and keep the happiness that we had together. I had a tremendous time. You know, the records speak for themselves, the results, the championships, and I got respect from the people who I worked with so long. I have tremendous respect for them as well. I leave friends behind, and I think that's the best way to do it.